Wait a minute. 1 minute.
To give Kristen some feedback.
Yes. And Addie's master template, yes.
Yeah, I learned the hard way.
Let me know when you're ready and I'll...
I'm ready.
Okay. You're ready.
Okay. All right, I'll call to order the Monday, January 13th, 2020 meeting of the Oregon City Planning Commission. We have 2 public hearings on the agenda, 2 new public hearings, and a continuation of a third. First item on the agenda is any public comments on items not on the agenda. Are there any? Okay, no cards? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item 3A, which is a public hearing on land use item GLUA-19-00041, general land use application variances for sign variances at the Hilltop McDonald's at 1450 Malala Avenue. And we'll start with the script. 2 public hearings on land use applications are scheduled tonight. Our role is to conduct the public hearing and to make decisions about the matter before us. In making those decisions, we must apply the applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Members of the Planning Commission are to be unbiased. Before the start of the hearings, I will ask the commissioners whether they have any potential conflicts, such as family, financial, or business relationships with any of the applicants, or with regard to the land in question. I will also ask whether any of the commissioners have discussed the application in question with any of the parties, or have independent knowledge of relevant facts, such as a visit to the site in question. Any member of the audience may question any commissioner about their disclosures. A staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. Staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. Hearing procedure steps are shown in the chart on the wall. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff before the hearing. Speakers will proceed in the order in which their card is received. You should fill out your address on the card so the city will notify you of its final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and city of residence. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, oversized poster boards, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they are not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised on the record for consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient detail and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond to the issue will not be deemed appealable to the City Commission or the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. So now we will open the public record for Oregon City file number GLUA-19-00041. Okay, and we'll begin with Commissioner Johnson, ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, or site visit.
Well, I've obviously been to the site before when I get hungry, so I've made a site visit, not special for this, but, and no contact or special interest.
Okay, Commissioner Stoll.
No site visits, no conflicts of interest or contact.
Okay. Commissioner Schlagenhofer.
I visited the site, no conflict of interest and no ex parte contact.
Okay, Commissioner Gage.
I have not been to the site recently, but I've been through and seen those menu boards many times. And no ex parte and no conflict.
Okay. And for me, I did visit the site, no ex parte contacts and no conflict of interest. Does anyone in the audience wish to question any of the commissioners about the statements they've made? Okay, then we'll move on to the staff report. Ms. Reed.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. I'm Kelly Reed, planner with the Community Development Department. So there are two applications before you, both for McDonald's sign variances. So the content is mostly the same, so I'll go through this one and then maybe the second item will probably be succinct. So the application is for, there are 4 actual variance applications for 2 signs, so 2 variances for each of the signs. And this is located at 1450 Malala Avenue, the Hilltop Shopping Center, McDonald's location. It does have a drive-through. And the existing drive-through has 2 lanes with 2 existing menu boards. The applicant is proposing to replace each of those large menu boards. So the site is currently actually non-conforming when it comes to the sign code. Sign code allows 1 freestanding sign per frontage, unless you have an especially long frontage. So there is a freestanding sign, like a main sign for the business that kind of takes up their one allowance for the 1 sign. And these menu boards are of the size that they are also considered freestanding signs. And so the site is currently non-conforming as it is. Now the applicant is proposing to replace these menu boards, which are about 45 square feet each, with smaller menu boards pictured on the right here. And so the variance is, the existing boards are going to be removed. And so the site's going to comply with the sign code for maybe a day or 2. And then, so the application is to exceed the maximum number of freestanding signs by 2 signs on the site. So the overall number of signs won't change, but the non-conforming nature of the site, the same number of signs would remain. And then the second variance is for a variable message board. So our code allows the content of a sign to change up to 3 times a day. And that was something that I believe was written to accommodate, gas prices, might change a couple of times a day potentially. But it's meant to preclude signs that flash, that have a running, scrolling message, or, those kind of billboards that, change every 5 seconds with a brand new image. So that's the purpose of that regulation. And so these menu boards are digital, and they're going to display each order and price for each customer that comes through the drive-thru. So they will change every time a new customer comes through. And so that'll be more than 3 times a day, I'm guessing. The size, the area of the menu board that would actually be changing that often it's not the entire menu board, it's a small portion of it. And so the variance, the staff report kind of talks about that aspect of it and how the intent of the code, the spirit of the code is kind of still being met by this variance request. So here you can see the proposed new signage is in the same location as the existing signage. That's a view from Malala, so you can see the menu boards pretty clearly. And then that's from Beaver Creek. There's some kind of vegetation that blocks the signs, but you can still see those menu boards. So the variance request, as I summarized earlier, exceeding number of freestanding signs. Also, there's a provision that freestanding signs on the same frontage need to be separated by a minimum 50 feet of distance. So these signs aren't necessarily oriented to a frontage. They're not oriented to Malala. They're oriented to the drive-through. So that's another provision that technically is being modified here. And so the variance criteria is, we're looking at the impacts to neighboring properties. We're looking to see that it's the minimum request that's needed to serve the needs of the applicant. And that any impacts, if there are any, would be mitigated, and that there are no practical alternatives. And of course that it complies with our comprehensive plan. So there's not anything super specific in our comprehensive plan about signage. So there wasn't a whole lot there, but there was some findings in the staff report for you. And so really what this came down to was reduction in the size of the signs helped to minimize sign clutter. There really aren't any impacts on the neighboring properties because we're sticking with the same number of signs. So these signs are smaller. However, exceeding the number of signs still leads to visual clutter than if the applicant actually met the standard of one sign per frontage. And so we are recommending some mitigation to screen the signs from the right-of-way for variable messages because those changes, the menu board changes that flash each time or that come up on the sign each time a new customer comes through won't be visible from the right-of-way, or will be minimally visible from the right-of-way, won't cause distractions to drivers, and shouldn't impact the streetscape. Thus, we don't think that any mitigation is needed for that particular aspect of this application. So my recommendation is approval of the variances with one condition of approval that will serve to mitigate the visual clutter of the number of signs, and that would be to plant 2 more trees on the property, one up here in the corner along Malala, and then another one next to the drive-through, and so this one would provide more screening from Beaver Creek Road view, and then this one from the Malala Road view. And that concludes my staff report.
Okay. Questions for staff?
I guess I have one. The city doesn't have a code for drive-through menu boards.
No.
That's why they end up being considered a sign.
Correct, yeah. So we have provisions for incidental signs and ancillary signs. And the size limitations for those are, I think, 16 square feet and I want to say 6 square feet. Those provisions allow a greater number of signs at the smaller sizes. So for a lot of businesses, those might suffice to provide the additional signage that they need on the site for things like this.
Yeah.
But because of the size of these, they're greater than that 16 square feet. And so
Okay.
they can't be considered an incidental freestanding sign. And so they're subject to the 1 per frontage standard.
Okay. Does every drive-through need a variance then? Because there is no code to fit
Well,
into?
I mean, a lot of the signs might be able to fall under incidental signs. Most of the drive-throughs in the city are existing, and so like this one, they're kind of existing, legal, non-conforming.
So they're just
and
too big to begin with already.
generally.
Okay. Okay. But, yeah,
Anyone else?
good.
I have one question, and it's a little odd because it partly relates to the next item on our agenda. But on this one, you recommended 2 trees for mitigation. On the other one, you recommended a hedge.
Yeah,
Is there a reason why this one
sure, yeah.
did not recommend a hedge?
Well, so this is the view from Beaver Creek, and you can see the existing trees kind of they serve to screen that view from, I guess if you're walking or driving along Beaver Creek and you're looking, a tree would probably provide the screening. It would be
Because there's already existing trees there.
at that height. Well, just to kind of, the topography is such that the view would be screened by something maybe a little taller.
Okay.
And then on Malala, I think I think you could probably go with maybe either, but, I was just noticing that these shrubs, wouldn't really screen a whole lot if those were to be right there. So they might screen, the cars, but maybe not the signs. So trees are just a little bit taller and might provide that screening. In the other case, the site is a little bit lower than the street, and so that's why the difference.
Okay, thank you. Anything else for staff? Okay, is there a representative from the applicant? And if you haven't filled out a card, if you would please do that. No, you don't have to do it now.
Absolutely.
But after you're done. And then introduce yourself and your name and your city of residence, please.
My name is David Ratliff. I'm from Site Enhancement Services in South Bend, Indiana, and obviously I'm here on behalf of McDonald's. Ms. Reed made a lot of my talking points for me, so I will try and not to rehash all of those. As stated, McDonald's is looking to replace their 2 existing menu boards with new menu boards that utilize digital technology. McDonald's has always been at the forefront of change in the industry. There's a reason why they're the leader, why they have the most market share. This is their next step in terms of utilizing newer technology to increase satisfaction for the customer and improve customer experience while at their locations. I know this doesn't really matter to you, but this is a nationwide initiative that they're doing. I know you're mostly concerned, obviously, with what goes on here in Oregon City, but the purpose of me saying that is this isn't just something they're willy-nilly deciding just to do here. We are working on these nationwide. As Ms. Reed said, these new menu boards are smaller in area. They're about half the size of the existing boards. We cut them down from anywhere to they're 40 to 45 square feet. The new boards are only 20. The purpose is it's the same information, just clearer, more concise, and easier to read. The idea being a customer pulls up to the drive-thru. If they don't already know what they want, they can find what they want easier, pick it up quicker, which isn't a word, but get through the drive-thru quicker and safer, and also be more happy with their and satisfied with their experience. Happy customers are repeat customer. These signs do give off less illumination than the current signs. They actually kind of work like a flat screen TV, where the illumination is directed towards the user instead of kind of in an outward pattern. These menu boards also can be set to auto dim. So when they're not in use, you can't really see them. And then when a car pulls up, it lights up for the user to use. The general message will only change twice per day. The general menu will go from the breakfast menu to the lunch dinner menu and then back. With regards to the section that shows the order, you order Big Mac, large fry, and a Coke, it will show those things. There's going to be a vehicle in front of it. It should generally only be visible to the person who's using it. So despite the fact that it does change a lot, it's not going to be a massive distraction to anyone. It should really only be visible by the user. We did forward a copy of the staff report to McDonald's with the recommendations of adding the additional vegetation. They are receptive to that. That is something that we have done at other locations. They are more than willing to do so here. McDonald's they want to do what is necessary. They want to work with the city. They're happy being here, obviously. They wouldn't have built one if they didn't or 3 or however many are in Oregon City if they didn't want to be here. So they are more than willing to work with the city and meet whatever stipulations that you have. And I will take any questions that you
Okay.
have.
Any questions from commissioners?
Yeah.
Commissioner Johnson?
A general question more than specifics on any of this is you indicated it's a next generation rollout, and I take it you're kind of referring to the United States. Is at that level you're going to do it nationwide?
Yes, we've already.
And where are you in the process? Are you the very entry level of this, or are you halfway through it, or?
This is actually, these sites are the last 2 that are currently on our agenda. We've handled many of these in Colorado. We are currently attorneys are now working on 3 that are in Salem. We've done these in Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Kentucky. And then should McDonald's decide to roll out more, we will do more. It's just, we're kind of at their mercy, waiting to see where they're going to take this to take this next.
It's a test rollout, basically.
Kind of, yes.
You pick a few cities as your model or your first case, and so it's still in the kind of early stage, but you have done
Yes.
several
Yes.
locations around the United States.
Yes. I personally have attended probably a dozen of these style of meetings for this specific purpose.
Okay?
Got a quick question.
Sure.
On the board, most of the contents of the board doesn't change, besides once or twice a day. How much of it is the order, the person's order that? Is that a different board?
No, it's on that board.
Shows them what they're ordering, total.
Yeah. Just it will tell you everything that you order, what the total, what the dollar amount owed.
Okay.
Is. It's a very small section of that.
Okay, the whole
board.
thing's not going to start blinking.
Oh no.
Okay.
There's no flashing, blinking, or there's no animation. You're not going to have Ronald McDonald juggling or Grimace doing whatever. There's none of that on these boards.
Okay, nothing that makes you want to drive over there and
No.
check it out. Okay. All right.
I have 2 quick questions. In the existing picture on the left, those roofs, are those part of the new signs?
No, that whole structure comes out.
Wonderful. And those existing signs also have a lot of depth to them. They're kind of triangle things, and these new ones are flat?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
They're
Anything-
much more visually pleasing than the existing boards.
Okay. Anything else for the applicant from the commissioners? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any representatives from recognized neighborhood associations? Any member of the public wishing to make any comment? All right. At that point, we will close the public hearing. Discussion from the commissioners or a motion?
Motion to approve GLUA 19-00041. We're doing just one now or both?
You can,
One. Oh,
Just one, or we
Sorry.
clump them together?
no, Ms. Richter, can we, just
You want to do
one?
both of them?
We haven't heard the staff
I
report on
think
the
you
second
haven't
one.
opened the hearing for the second.
Yeah, we need
I
to,
think
yeah, we can take care of that. Let's do them separately, just the first one,
Okay. So
with conditions from staff. The trees.
The trees? That wasn't part of the original application?
Well, that's
Staff's recommendation.
that's part of the staff recommendation.
Okay, so just with the recommendations, all right. Motion to approve GLUA -19-00041 with staff recommendations.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, call a roll.
Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Stoll,
Aye.
Commissioner Gage,
Aye.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer,
Aye.
Chair Mitchell.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. I will open the public record for GLUA-19-00042.
You might ask if any commissioner have any.
Right, I should have done that before I opened the public hearing, but, okay. So, same questions. Site visit,
Oh, sorry.
ex parte contacts, or conflict of interest regarding the one at, on Clackamas Drive.
Same answers for both.
Go,
Nothing
can
new.
you, why don't you go through it?
Okay.
'Cause it's a separate public hearing.
No contact, no special visit, no special interest.
Okay, Commissioner Stoll.
No contact, no site visit, and no conflict of interest.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer.
No site visit, no ex parte contact, no conflict of interest.
Yes, site visit, no ex parte contact, and no conflict.
Okay. And for me, no site visit, no ex parte conflict, and no conflict of interest. Any member of the public wishing to question any of the commissioners? Okay, now the public record is open. Ms. Reed, is there anything different about this one that you need to let us know other than maybe the shrub, but
Yeah,
whatever?
Just
No need to repeat ourselves,
very
but
few
whatever's different.
differences, right? So this one's a 2010 Clackamas Drive, between Clackamas Drive and McLaughlin Boulevard. So this one actually has two frontages. It allows two freestanding signs. There are two freestanding signs with the arches already. So again, these two menu boards are in excess of the sign code allowance. So the proposed signs are the same. The existing signs look the same as the other location. The view from McLaughlin, the building is set down a little bit lower and you can see the existing, there are kind of some arborvitae type shrubs that are there now that kind of provide a bit of screening currently. And so the condition of approval is to add more of those, more shrubs. They don't have to be that species, but that would provide similar kind of screening from McLaughlin Boulevard for the same reasons as the last application. And so the variance criteria is the same. This site does have two overlays, and that's floodplain and the Willamette River Greenway. So in the floodplain, we have a no net fill standard. So because these signs are smaller, they're likely not to add fill, but we didn't have any documentation from the applicant that was the case. So this is just requiring that documentation. If the base of the sign happens to have more volume to it than the existing signs, then they'll have to make sure that that same amount of volume is excavated somewhere on the site so that there's no net fill in the floodplain. And then there are building codes for floodproofing that may or may not apply to signs. If they do, those will be required. Willamette River Greenway, there are no conditions of approval related to this. The signs are on the side of the building that faces away from the river, and they don't have any impact on views or access to the river. And so my recommendation is those floodplain conditions, and then that the applicant plant at least 8 additional large shrubs spaced 4 feet on center in that same area where those existing shrubs are located. And that's it.
Okay, any questions for staff? Okay.
What's the definition of a large shrub?
I believe we have a plant list that may or may not include small versus large shrubs, but we don't.
Is it a height or?
Not really.
Okay.
I think that would be something that, they would give me a planting plan and say, does this work? And I would, use my, resources that I have to look at whether that's a, 2-footer shrub or more like a 5-footer shrub.
Yep.
But if you want to add more specificity, that would be fine.
Any other questions for staff? No. Okay. Applicant, do you feel any need to add anything to this? Come on up.
Do you need me to do the name and address again for the record? on this
Probably
one?
should, because it's a separate public hearing.
Sure. David Ratliff from Site Enhancement Services in South Bend, Indiana. My arguments are essentially, or my statements are pretty much the same as the last site. I've already sent notification to McDonald's regarding documentation on the net fill. Hopefully I will have that on my desk when I get back to the office on Wednesday. As soon as I have it, I will forward that in. Again, we notified them about adding the vegetation per the staff recommendations. They, again, have no issues doing that. If necessary, we have at other locations where this has been a stipulation kind of put together, McDonald's has put together a proposal, submitted it basically like, will this work? Is this satisfactory? And if there's anything that you want changed, they'll meet whatever it is that you're requiring them to do. Whether it's a height or, a width or whatever, they'll meet it. Again, these are the same boards as the other site, so I won't bore you by repeating myself. But yeah, I will take any questions that you have at this point for this particular site.
Questions for the applicant?
No.
Okay, thank you.
And also, just one more question for me.
Yes.
Do you need me to fill out two cards because they're two separate, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, one card for both items.
Both hearings?
Both, you put both agenda numbers.
Oh,
on
yeah,
it.
just list, okay.
All right, that's fine.
Thank you.
Every once in a while we save.
Save a piece of paper. Okay, any representative of neighborhood association wishing to comment? Any member of the general public wishing to comment? Okay, at this point, we'll close the public hearing. Any comment from commissioners or a motion?
Motion to approve GLUA 19-00042 with conditions.
I'll second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Call the roll.
All right, Commissioner Schlegelhofer.
Aye.
Commissioner Gage.
Aye.
Commissioner Stoll.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Mitchell.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you.
Very much.
I'll take it.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate you allowing me this time. And just for the record, I want to thank Ms. Reed.
If you're going to say something for the record, you get out the microphone. We just need it for the recording, that's all.
Just wanted to thank Ms. Reed, and I know she's not here, but Diliana for all of her help in this whole process. They were very, very helpful, made this as easy as possible. So just wanted to let you guys know. We really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Wow, 2 public hearings in 32 minutes, huh? Okay. Now we're on to item 3C, which is planning file LEG 19-00003, Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan Code and Zoning Amendments, and this is a continuation of a public hearing, so we don't have to read the script again, which is a good thing with my throat. We'll move right on to Ms. Robertson Gardner with your report.
All right, thank you, Chair Mitchell. I'm back to talk about Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan. In your packet, there was a memo where I attempted to memorialize Planning Commission direction on kind of all the items we spoke about through the fall and the winter. There were kind of 3 outstanding items that I saw, and I'd like to go over them this evening. Some I'm really just asking for concurrence that I heard it right, and other ones I'm actually asking for kind of further direction. Our next steps after this will be coming back to you in February with a full package and any additional items that you provide direction to me that you want to talk about. So the 3 items tonight are the expanded home occupation cottage industry, and that's the one where I hope I got everything right, so I'm actually asking for concurrence. Discussion about upland habitat, which is in response to a letter that was received from the Natural Resource Committee. And then kind of an update of where we are with our conversation with the Parks Acquisition Code and the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. So to start off, this is one thing I'd like to add into the record is there's a letter from Todd Mobley who wrote a memo actually in November, and that hard copy is available for you in front of your dais, and an email update to me today that I've also printed out, and I'll be added to the record. Mr. Mobley, in his memo, wanted to bring up the issue related to street collector classification for both the East Ridge Road and kind of the Holly Lane Extension Road, kind of the big two main north-south roads in the concept plan, and requesting flexibility. And so I can provide a little more update from our development services, public works, and our transmission engineer on kind of options you may have as a planning commission at the next meeting to give direction to the city commission on this issue. I don't know if we'll have a definitive answer, like we agree or we don't agree, but we might provide some options for you to provide kind of guidance and direction to the city commission on this issue as it relates to speeds, street width, street design, and kind of loads of traffic on those two main north-south connector roads. So the first of the three outstanding issues is the park acquisition code, and specifically 4 items: dimensional details of both the open space park and the linear park, some revisions to the residential calculation, introduction of non-residential contribution calculation that was promised the last time we talked about the Parks Code, and then an update on the PRAC, the Parks Rec Advisory Committee, in their next meeting. The last time you saw this, there was some to-be-determined sections in the park definitions of the descriptions of the park dimensions. I worked with previous community service director Phil Lewis before he left on some of these numbers, and now I'm working with interim community service director Don Robertson, and this will be presented to the Parks and Rec Committee at their meeting next week. So what I'm looking for this evening is more of comments back and then kind of telling you where we are in the process. But the new information that was added, I put it underlined, and that is a minimum max size of each pearl being a 2 acres minimum and a 5 acres maximum. Seems pretty reasonable. We're looking at a 10-acre total, and that's not the string part. Once again, that is the string that connects the pearls is going to be part of the street right-of-way. So that will be dedicated as part of right-of-way dedication and built, where the pearls will be acquired as part of the park acquisition code. You have to create a minimum average width and depth to make sure that we don't have a 2-foot deep, 1,000 foot long park. So these are just reasonable, 200 foot in each for depth and width to make sure we have a reasonable size, and we're trying to have collaborative cooperation with future development proposals. And then this was a specific from the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee last summer and our community service director, which is basically half of the space related to active recreation components. So some of it could be passive recreation components, some of it's active, but they wanted to name a specific number to be active recreation. That can be many things. One kind of a good example is the Pearl District in Portland. They have 3 parks that when they chose to do Pearl District, the River Front District, and you have Jameson Park, which is the active, kind of the active children's play area with the big fountain, and there's a lot going on, and there's lots of activities and events. You have Jameson Park, which is kind of that more passive recreation area where you can sit and kind of look at the wetland and kind of feel part of what that area was prior to development. And then they have the fields, which is kind of the newer kind of kids park, like with actual play equipment. So the same thing could be, there could be active recreation and passive in each park, or one park could be all passive and one could be all active. And that's really up to future Parks and Rec Advisory Committee and the Parks Department on kind of what they see as their plan for these 3 parks. But this is actually inside the acquisition code, so these are hard numbers that we can use for the acquisition of the space.
Before you leave it,
Sure.
Sorry. I'm trying to wrap my head around minimum average width and minimum average depth.
Mm-hmm. That would be maybe if for some reason it came to a point, maybe it's more of a wedge with a frontage onto a street because of how a street lays out. It's not necessarily.
So it's not an average of of all 3 or 4 of the
No,
pearls,
you're
it's the
taking out-
average of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just like you would do an average depth for a lot.
Got it,
Same thing.
okay. Thank you.
Kind of along that line, in my mind anyway, is you talk about minimum and maximum pearl sizes, 2 to 5 acres. And then you do a combined thing to 10 acres, I understand that. But then, is there a minimum number of pearls or
Yeah,
a
three
maximum?
to 4. So no less than 3 and no more than 4.
Okay.
And that really is a component of the Community Service Department does not want to have lots of mini pocket parks because they have said that that's a lot harder to maintain. In this situation, it's the string that really even gets to a place where they can support this concept because they can offload, for example, the lawnmower and not have to load it back up again. It can kind of make its way between park, and it can be considered kind of one larger park in the sense of maintenance. They don't have to reload the vehicle because that's what takes a long time. And that's just an example of many things. And so they really don't want to have lots of pearls, nor do they really want 1 or 2, because that's not the idea is kind of allowing this linear park as it goes through the residential area. So the Thimble Creek Conservation Area, again, we got kind of clear direction both from the Planning Commission and the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee that this should be an open space owned by the public. So you have to write code describing it. And the adopted concept plan provides some direction, which is the half of the area between the stream buffer, and the stream buffer is, you can look behind you, but it is, and I could actually do it this way, sorry. I'll do it here. This is the stream buffer. So you have kind of an area here between the edge of the stream buffer and the 490-foot elevation. So if you kind of drew a box right here, half of that in the concept plan is identified for open space. It doesn't say northern half or southern half or the middle. It just says half of that area is identified for open space. It also identifies a 700-foot non-interrupted view corridor. And if you go back to what I've provided for additional direction, is that along the east ridge of the parkway, just to again to remind that this is it's for 700 feet, there will be no homes on the east ridge of the parkway, and that would be the view corridor. It identifies 2 public viewpoints, and so I've provided additional description of what that means. Once again, this is helping as staff works on a dedication, so this needs to be codified. Because if we don't have it codified, we're just going to be continually working back and forth. So we want enough specificity that makes clear and objective acquisition easier and more clear for both parties. So we have a 400-foot minimum size, 400-foot separation between each viewpoint, and then the idea is to have some area being flat, some area of it flat, because you don't want to have a viewpoint that's really at a cliff, at a precipice. So their idea that it's 0.35 of an acre that's less than 10% slope. And so that's kind of showing 2 landing areas of 0.35 acre, which is the 2 viewpoints. So once again, they're generally 400 feet apart, somewhere in that area. So that provides a lot of flexibility in that dedication to work with the future developer, because they're going to be building and platting a subdivision. So they still got to put the streets in and figure out where the lots are and work with our geologic hazard code to figure out where it makes sense to build, where it's harder to build. So this, I think, provides that balance of certainty and flexibility that will help us as we move forward to dedicate that open space. So not a lot new is added other than specificity on the size of the viewpoints, and that need to be some area that's flatter. And that is identified with a 7 acres, that's about 14 acres if you look at, and you measure that, once again, that kind of rectangle, which is between the edge of the stream corridor, the top of 490, this is about 14 acres. So 7 is half. Oh, sorry.
That opening statement, it says half of the area can be that, in that area is open space. What's the other half? Or what
Well, if the developer wants to give the other half to the city, they can. But I think the idea was we're working at what was in the concept plan and how do we write code to implement was in the concept plan. If they want to dedicate over and above, I think the city is open to accepting it.
So it's really not defined by the concept plan what the other half has to be?
No, I mean, it can be private. I mean,
can,
a lot of it's going to be very unbuildable. It could be
Right, yeah.
lots that are
Pretty steep
60 foot by 300 if they want to, but it could also, if the, developer wants to dedicate the rest through a negotiation, I think the city is open to taking that. But once again, I'm trying to write code that goes from the concept plan language to acquisition. So asking for more would be harder because we don't have that direct link in the adopted concept plan.
So 700-foot non-interrupted view corridor. Mm-hmm. So 700 feet along Ridge Parkway, the Ridge Parkway. And the depth of that would depend on the slope and how.
Yeah.
So the top of whatever you allowed to be built would be below the height of the viewpoint?
Yeah, I mean, it's very unlikely that, I think in the concept plan, they thought, well, maybe you could do a driveway down and have a lot or two, but you could see it from it. It's going to be really hard to do that through the Geologic Hazards Code. Not saying that couldn't happen, but it's going to be really difficult for that to happen.
Yeah.
So once again, I think we use these as the parameters, and then the developer looks at our Geologic Hazard Code and our subdivision code and tries to figure out what makes sense for them, but then also implements these very clear and objective standards.
Okay.
Because there could be multiple ways to lay it out. All right, any other questions on this page? Okay. So there were one outstanding item and then one item that, as we have been playing with the numbers, we're realizing that what the consultant recommended wasn't necessarily proportional. So I want to talk about the non-residential contribution first. There was always an understanding that both residential and non-residential development in the Beaver Creek Road concept plan will benefit from parks. If you were an employee, you could be providing access to a linear park. You'd be walking near development that's near parks has higher value, and everyone that's in the concept plan has some connection to the new parks. And so the residential calculation is based on dwelling units, but you don't have that with non-residential. So, and knowing that everyone's paying system development fees for parks as well. So this is really over and above looking at either money to help with acquisition or about looking for interim development. So maybe getting the site ready for just some easy grass, or is there some really interim development of the parks that can happen before a really formal parks plan is approved and built. So this is some ability for acquiring the property when it's not proportional. Maybe makes sense to have a 4-acre Pearl, but the subdivision only pencils out proportionally for a 3-acre. There might be additional money to purchase the extra area. So kind of this is how everyone kind of is involved and supports parks in this area. So I've identified as $1,000 per every 5,000 square feet of new commercial space. And so you can see some examples below. We've anticipated about 500,000 square feet of new employment space, and that equals about $100,000 worth of additional money to help with acquisition and interim site development. Any questions?
Is that $1,000 per 5,000 square feet? Did that come from other communities around us that have done that?
It was really
what?
looking at, that's a good question. It's looking at internally with talking to different staff and department and what made reasonable sense, knowing that we we wanted to put something that basically says, we understand that that non-residential has a relationship to parks, but we're also looking at trying to promote employment in this area, and we did not want to create a burden. So this seemed like a reasonable approach. But I know staff is open to have further discussion on this. So the revised residential calculation, it initially had, instead of 4 acres up there in red, it had 8 acres. And so when you actually ran the numbers, a 350 lot subdivision had a requirement for about 7 acres of dedication for the linear park pearls. And so if you only need 10 acres for your linear park, probably the first subdivision may be triggered to build everything with a fact, if you used 8 acres as a factor rather than 4. And we want to make sure that this is proportional and very clear and objective, and we don't want to be in a place where we are providing code that the private development does not see as proportional and could potentially put us to a legal liability as we move for code. And so looking at an analysis for, if you have 1,100 new dwelling units identified for this concept plan area, and we have about 10 acres, using a factor of 4 acres is much more proportional to look for as new development comes in to what their impact is regards to park dedication. So staff recommends revising the 8 acre factor to be 4 acres. Does that make sense? So if you looked at the 350 lot subdivision, so I did the math, if you did 2.6 times 350, so for 350 dwelling units, times 4 divided by 1,000, you get 3.64 acres. If you had it at 8 acres, once again, you'd be about 7.5 acres. And so, it's going to be a little over 7 was 7.2 acres. And so, being 1/3 of the dwelling units, a little under 1/3 of the dwelling units, but you're providing over 2/3 of the park space. So we felt that original factor was not proportional.
And that calculation does not include the Thimble Creek open space.
Correct. That's just flat out dedication.
Okay.
Because that's also a very unbuildable area, so we'll have less of a worry of proportionality in that situation.
Yeah.
And this is establishing the amount of park acres per industrial or residential. And that's a fee they pay up front?
Yeah, so if the park pearl is on the property you are proposing, you have to dedicate it proportionally. Mm-hmm. If, let's say, you're doing an apartment complex and it's maybe right on Beaver Creek and you're not proposing anything where the pearl is, you would have to pay fee in lieu of. And the city would use that money to acquire that land, either with the other development or the next development that comes in. But we felt that the 8 acre factor was really basically the first application in would have to be kind of really dedicating most of the park space, not necessarily proportional. So kind of if you wait till the end, you don't have to really do much dedication.
This is a dedication factor, initial dedication factor. Mm-hmm. And you're looking to make that fairly equal between industrial and residential.
Well, industrial is just paying the fee in lieu because they're not, none of the industrial area. Mm-hmm.
But the end result of all that is it's going to be park land space that the city's going to maintain.
This is just the acquisition of land. So the next step, so let's see through all of these subdivision applications. Tract A gets dedicated to or Tract B, whatever the tract is, gets dedicated to the city of Oregon City as a park space. And then the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee and the Community Service Division would then work on their own master plan for that park. And then it would come, just like all the master plans and come through the city and the site plan design review gets reviewed on staff level, that would happen through the city as basically a capital improvement park. But what this fee in lieu of with the non-residential and even the fee in lieu for the residential that may not have the park space on their property can be either used to augment acquisition or potentially used for some interim site development. That really is outside the SDC fees, because SDCs really aren't meant for interim site development. So you kind of have to wait as long as it takes to build that park. Any questions on this?
I gotta say it. I'm a little troubled by that.
Okay.
I'm less troubled because of the Thimble Creek open space. The reason I'm troubled, 2016 survey, National Parks and Recreation Association, national average is 9.7 acres of park per 1,000 residents. And now we're saying 4. But again, because there is also that added green space of the Thimble Creek, and this really is a pretty confined area. You know, the other goal that a lot of Parks Department have is that a park is within half a mile of every resident, and we're going to be, you know, way under that in this area. So I'm a little concerned about it, but the more I think about it, I guess I'm less concerned because these parks are going to be serving a pretty confined, higher density kind of an area, and it'll be easy for people to walk and get to.
And I think that's where the 8 acres came from, is that understanding of the National Park Standard, but you still have to look at proportionality of any one individual. It's one thing to say we should be buying land as a city to ensure that happens. The other is to say, developer X, we need this land.
Yeah, okay.
So no, I think you take it on balance. You have the 7 acres plus these 10 acres built over time.
Okay.
Okay. So next steps, I meet with the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee next week on January 23rd. I'll be bringing all this information. This is new to them, other than they supported the concept this summer. They provided some additional direction related to, yes, the conservation area should be a park, and they supported the pearl and string approach. So really these details that we talked about this evening will be presented to them, and I'll be asking for a recommendation of support. So that will allow you as Planning Commission to forward this to the City Commission, knowing that we've brought in the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. If we hear any additional comments from them, I'll bring it back to you. We are also going to make sure that we have integrated any, what do they have as goals for this area that we may not know about, so that you understand kind of their goals and priorities for this area, and if that makes sense for the Beaver Creek Road concept plan.
And Christina, can you give them an update on when you're going to talk about the habitat area and the recommendation from NRC?
Yeah, that's my next slides.
Oh.
You're ahead of me. So the next idea is the home occupation cottage housing. Hopefully this is the last time I'll talk about this. I know it's been a little bit changed over time, but I re-listened to our conversation and the November 18th meeting. I think I heard everything and received direction, so I'll go over that with you. On these slides. We have hours of operation and commercial vehicle allowance, so I think we're the two outstanding issues. Real quickly, there is a discussion about construction work hours, and these are the construction work hours for public improvements in the right-of-way. So we have 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Saturday. So keep that in your head. There's only 1 hour difference between this and what were proposed in the code in the next slide. So I'm kind of asking for direction if you want to keep what's proposed in the slide based on our previous conversation, or amend it to be this. And it's the 6 p.m. on Saturday, because the code is written right now. And the next slide has it 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday. So these are the additional red lines based on our conversation and the November meeting. The hours of operation for A and F, both retail and employees, are the same. So if you want to have them be the same as construction hours, that would be 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Saturday. E was the conversation about commercial vehicles. So what I heard from the Planning Commission was conversation about demarcating a commercial driver's license. So you can have one commercial vehicle associated with a business that has no more than 15 seats and does not require a commercial driver's license, and one trailer associated with the business. And I realized we had to put a length limit on that. And so I put 20 feet in total length. That would include the tongue, because 20 feet is the average parking space in your driveway. So that was the logic behind that. And so if you wanted to, you could have a vehicle on one part of the driveway and your trailer on the other part, and those two would be allowed to be parked off-site. If you had them all connected together, you probably have a really long driveway, which could be the case if you wanted to have a side driveway, but most likely, and neither the trailer nor that vehicle can be stored in the right-of-way. So I'm open for any, let me see, actually one more thing. Oh, no.
Commissioner Stoll, I know you're probably more familiar with the commercial vehicle,
Yeah.
or the CDL. Does this make sense?
Yep, makes perfect sense.
Okay. Any comment from commissioners on that?
No.
We're okay with that? Okay, and what about Saturday 9 to 5 versus Saturday 9 to 6?
I don't see a problem with that.
With 9 to 6?
Right.
9 to 6, either way.
Yeah, 6 is fine.
Okay, we'll
9 to
stay with
6.
construction hours.
Yeah, stay with construction hours. Okay.
And that's good, because if construction hours change, we can come back to city commission, or the planning commission, say, does this need to change? All right, so the last item is upland habitat. In September, I presented kind of an update on upland habitat and kind of discrepancies I saw based on the code and the concept plan. And I looked for direction from the Planning Commission. We received a letter from the Natural Resource Committee, which is in your packet, and I'm kind of, in the next couple of slides, going to kind of go over the issues identified and kind of some options for the Planning Commission this evening to provide recommendations to staff. So in the 2006 Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan, they inventoried upland habitat. And upland habitat are areas outside the stream or wetland buffer. The areas you see in goldenrod that I numbered, so those numbers are created by me. They don't mean anything other than I just wanted to number 3 areas. So those 3 main areas are areas that I identified that were outside of our natural resource overlay district and were not part of our current natural resource overlay district. In 2010, the city did look at if we wanted to add upland habitat to our natural resource overlay district outside of our stream buffers, and the city did not, except for areas in city parks. And so that is kind of a policy discussion that the community went through and the city went through in 2010 when we updated our natural resource overlay district to look at habitat. The 2006 plan was kind of a precursor, and that policy decision hadn't been made in 2006. Nevertheless, upland habitat was identified in the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan as an important area, as one of the goals. And I can zoom in on this. What I did as a staff level is I overlaid, and I'll kind of explain the different overlays to these maps. I worked with our GIS department, so what you see in green, actually I'll use here right here. What you see in green, can you see my?
Yes.
There we go. Okay. What you see in green is a geo-reference of the map on the previous page. So once again, we have area 1, 2, 3, and 4. But what we also have on this page is the natural resource overlay district in pink, and the geologic hazard overlay in red and kind of a light yellow. So the areas that are still clearly outside of either our natural resource overlay district or a geologic hazards is clearly 1. You can kind of see right here. This is outside of the pink natural resource buffer. 2, it kind of peaks out right here, a little bit here, a little bit here. Peaks out a little bit here in 3. And in 4, it's pretty much well within the geologic hazard overlay. So as you put our 2 city overlays that are most applicable, our natural resource, some of the upland habitat is incorporated in those 2 areas, but not all. So it did provide a little more clarity in areas 3 and 4. The geologic hazard definitely goes well into that. Not all of 3, but almost all of 4 are encompassed by the geologic hazard. The letter attached to your packet by the Natural Resource Committee, they care a lot about upland habitat, especially as it relates to areas that are contiguous to larger upland habitat. And this is where I'm not a scientist, I'm not going to put my scientist hat on, but you can look at their letter. They were most concerned about areas 3 and 4 because it already was connected to a larger habitat area. Area 1, unless it could be shown that that tree canopy had a lot of habitat contribution, they were the least concerned about 1, and 2, they felt it was already, once again, it was part of a kind of a larger natural resource. So the letter you see from the Natural Resource Committee requests the Planning Commission take another look at upland habitat and provide additional protection. So that's their request. And specifically areas 3 and 4 is the number 1 priority, and then 2, and then 1. And once again, those numbers are my made-up numbers to describe the 4 areas.
Okay, and you're looking for what?
Some of the options this evening. One option, which is stay with the existing recommendation, which is, the existing code substantially implements the vision, and the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan, and on balance is looking at providing employment opportunities, housing opportunities, and protection of natural resources, and it's a balance of competing factors, and our existing codes substantially implement that vision. That's kind of the existing recommendation that I received from the Planning Commission in September. If the Planning Commission wants to provide additional protections, some opportunities are: 1, include all of the areas in the Beaver Creek Growth Concept Plan upland habitat into the Natural Resource Overlay District boundary. This would be kind of creating a new subsection in the Natural Resource Overlay District. And we'd have to identify what areas could be built on or mitigated, or could you go through our process to provide a mitigation plan if you built into that. The other 2 options are include some of the area, not all, so maybe, like just area 2 could be included in the Natural Resource Overlay District. The third option is not include anything in the Natural Resource Overlay District, but provide, Beaver Creek Road site-specific protection or mitigation requirements and our tree protection standards. So right now in 1741, if you are doing a subdivision or commercial development and you remove larger trees, you do have to mitigate for them. But right now there is an option that you can pay fee in lieu or replant. So one opportunity would be to provide additional code that kind of restricts that ability or provides much higher standards if you remove it in that area. So those are some of the options if you do want to provide additional regulation in those upland habitat areas. So right now, staff's recommendation, I think you legally aren't required to do that. I think you substantially implement the code. That being said, we have a letter from the Natural Resource Committee, and we have avenues that the Planning Commission could pursue if they wanted to.
Let me go back to the map, bring those 4 areas up. Okay. Comments from commissioners?
I'm good with staff's recommendation.
Staff kind of made 2. That we're okay where we are?
We're okay where we are. Can you go to the next slide? Existing code substantially implements plan vision as their recommendation, and I don't see any need to revise the tree code.
Okay.
I'll go back to that.
Anyone else?
I don't have any major objections to that.
To going with the current plan?
Yeah.
I don't either.
I agree.
Okay. All right. Sounds like we agree with your recommendation.
Okay, well, it's not necessarily.
Well, that,
Yeah, go with existing.
It is my, so I will provide that back to the Natural Resource Committee, and I think, that's their job, is to speak, and use science and help explain these more complicated issues, both to the Planning Commission and the City Commission. So we can find out if they want to provide additional comments to you, or they want to have additional conversations with the City Commission when this moves to their level.
yeah.
So where we are next, I think I have clear direction on all these issues tonight, so thank you. I will have a further conversation about the street collector comment from Todd Mobley, and kind of at what level of detail we have the ability to make recommendations to the Planning Commission at this level. Sometimes we don't know yet, so we don't necessarily want to say no, nor do we want to say, sure, that sounds fine. So there may be some nuance to what I find out, and maybe there'll be nuance to what the Planning Commission recommends as it moves forward to the City Commission about how to address collector width, size, speed, all those things for the two north-south roads as we get actually into the development, as well as the conversation with the City Commission about there was a direction to look into funding for Beaver Creek Road as it's built in more of a capital improvement project. And so we'll be looking at funding, and it could be that the collector designation is linked in a little bit to funding approaches as well. So we'll learn more.
Who is Todd Mobley in relation to this project?
Todd Mobley is a transportation engineer that is working on behalf of a potential future applicant.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
No, and I do know we have public comment
We do have
this
public
evening.
comment?
Yeah, so we want to make sure we have that, so I'll pass that over.
Okay.
And then if your conversations or comments change based on public comment, we can have continue our deliberations about this.
Okay. All right. Elizabeth Grace or Lindsay, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Gracer Lindsay. I'm from rural Clackamas County. It would be helpful if you brought up that slide of the home occupation code. My comment was on that slide. Because the goal of the home occupation and cottage industry code changes is to get more jobs in the city, especially homegrown jobs, and also to reduce the commuting impacts on the overcrowded roads in the area, please consider changing on that top line. It says home occupation and cottage industries are allowed. Can you see where that is? Instead, it could say something like, home occupation and cottage industries shall be the development type, where you're asking that they actually happen rather than they're a possibility. That would let you have more assurance that there actually would be home occupations coming out of this land. I had one other comment, but it's on an unrelated topic. It's on the parks. We were hearing about the park factor and the 4-acre park factor being associated with the 10 acres of parks. I was thinking that the original total park area was 20 acres, and that would correspond more with the 8 acres of park factor. So it seems like what's happening is that the total amount of parks is being reduced. And it might be better to go back to having the 20 acres of parks and sticking with the 8-acre park factor. It was explained tonight that if you had 10 acres of parks and the 8-acre factor, it would all be on the first developer. But if you had the great big, the 20 acres that was originally intended, then there wouldn't be that problem.
Okay. Thank you. So, okay. Any comments from commissioners?
in regards to Elizabeth's suggestion about saying not are allowed but must be, was that the intent of this, is to only be home occupation and cottage industry?
This is the home occupation business license section. So if you want to get a home occupation business license,
How would that affect if we changed to her recommendation? How would that?
well, you're not required to have a business in your house.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's the difference. I think if you want a business in your house, here are the options you have for your home occupation license.
I apologize for putting words in your mouth, but I think what you were saying is wording that more said that it's encouraged to have home occupation and cottage industries, not just that they're allowed, but we're encouraging them by allowing these expanded.
I think encourage is a great word. Shall is a very specific word, and it's hard for home occupation, but encouraged over allow, I think, is a reasonable
I like that.
revision. That's still.
You'd have to come back up so we can get it on the record.
There's two stages at which this could have an impact. One is when there's a development plan, so the developer would develop the buildings so that they could accommodate home occupation. Like, I actually was in Milwaukee last week, and I noticed that on Harrison, they have a lot of units along there where they have retail space on the first floor and a home associated with it. A lady I know lives in one of those. But the construction of the building would need to be that way. Otherwise, the person who buys it will have a difficult time having a home occupation because our building hasn't been constructed properly.
Understood. Thank you. Okay.
I think did you want me to respond?
Yeah.
Well, the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan looks at housing options. This is a home occupation regulation that's, codified in our code. What I heard direction previously was that this planning commission was not going to require this for all development. It's an option. And so I think what Ms. Grazer-Lindsay is asking is kind of more towards that requirement approach. And that would be a change in planning commission direction.
This is the prohibiting the HOA from prohibiting the home occupation. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, this would be allowed if the development, correct. That's the direction I heard.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Is this also looking at the home occupation not being specific to Beaver Creek or to the existing city?
No.
At one time, I thought I'd heard something that, did we want the same policy in both positions, the rest of the city and the...
Maybe one day. What this is just recommended changes for the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan area of Thimble Creek. And this is really a test case. I think a lot of these concepts are not quite ready for being approved with existing neighborhoods. I think they're kind of some unknown, for this community, some unknown options. And so this is a good test case. People who move into this neighborhood are moving in knowing that this is an option. So this would be kind of how this plays out. Could be a recommendation from the Planning Commission for more of a citywide look at a later date. And as well as code changes for this concept plan, we're really working on keeping them constrained to just concept plan implementation and not citywide. The last comment I wanted to make about parks, if you looked at the 10 acres plus the 7 acres of the open space, you're at 17 acres. And most likely the conservation area will probably be a little bit larger, but I think but exactly half is 7 acres. And, I'm sorry, one more piece.
And I think that's what for me, makes it less of a
Yeah.
concern as there is that.
And I think the one more piece,
Area.
the string part, is while it could be considered part of a park, but we're putting it in the right of way, so there probably is about 3 acres worth of linear string when you get all the way down to it. So it's just really, it's in a different category. It's in more of a right of way, but it is that linear pedestrian bike access between the parks.
I got one more thing.
Sure.
Going back to what Liz was talking about, go back to that. As far as allowing a use, that doesn't get a whole lot of, excitement. People like incentives. If we could promote it somehow to the point where it's worth trying to set up a business inside the home, I'm not sure what kind of promoting we could do. Tax credit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how they promote electric cars, by giving them a nice fat tax credit. What can
Yeah.
we do to promote it instead of just allowing it?
I'm going to continue the mantra that Elizabeth Decker, our consultant who helped write this, reminds me is sometimes the zoning code's not the best avenue for everything. And so I think we're looking at the description of how you do it, but one thing the Planning Commission can do as this recommendation package moves forward, if the Planning Commission feels that, behooves the city to really kind of highlight and either incentivize through communication or incentivize through another manner, that could be done outside of land use code. So if this is something the community, this Planning Commission really wants to see implemented but not required, then what are the other avenues to get the word out and to potentially incentivize? That would be kind of outside land use. And those can be integrated into Planning Commission recommendations if that's something the Planning Commission wants to do. So do let me know, because I can bring those findings back.
It's just an idea.
But you're okay with us saying that it's encouraged rather than
I can work on the specific language, but if allow may need to be there legally, but we can, adding the word encourage in that sentence somewhere is helpful, I think.
Okay. Any other comments from commissioners? I've got 2 things. And I kind of want to ask the commission's indulgence. As I'm sitting here thinking about the recommendation from the Natural Resource Committee, that's the world they live in. And I would like to ask the other commissioners if it would be advisable, if you'll indulge, having a representative from the Natural Resources Committee come to our meeting and give us a little more background in this, because I don't feel fully qualified to make that decision, and I don't want to dismiss their work out of hand, because they're the experts and they're very serious about what they're doing. So
I agree 100%.
Yep, I'd agree with
Okay.
that.
Sure.
all right, can you
Yep,
make that
I can
read?
do that.
Okay. The other thing I have, I noticed in your report, you made reference to the reduced speed limit, the possibility of 20 minutes. Thank you for putting that in there. Another thing that I've talked about, and I honestly want to know from the commissioners, because I'm more than willing to get off of this soapbox if nobody else is with me, but the idea of grade separated bike path as opposed to only physically separated, as opposed to only separated by a paint stripe. I'd like to see that in our recommendation to the City Commission. If the other commissioners don't agree, I'm going to get off my soapbox and not talk about it again.
That sounds expensive. I mean, you're talking about grade changes at every intersection?
No, I'm sorry. No, not grade level.
Oh,
Moving it, instead of it being a stripe, and here's the bike lane, the bike lane goes on the other side of,
the Portland model.
some sort of a
So
divider.
I think that's a horrible model, in my own opinion. Mostly because you are opening up substantial increase in chance of getting car doored by a passenger who's not used to looking for bicycles before they open their passenger side door. And if you're trying to encourage carpooling, then there's going to be passengers on that side, and they're not going to look in the mirror before they open that door into the bike lane. And
I get that because I actually did that to a biker.
There you go.
I have to admit. Fortunately, there was no harm done.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I get it.
Well, I see the merits on two sides, but I'm not the expert on it as to, do we put down some paint, putting paint down on asphalt or concrete and say cars this side, walkers here, or bicycles there. It doesn't give me a whole lot of satisfaction or sensation that it's really as safe as we would like it to be. But then the other side of that equation is depending on if you still stay at the same grade, but you move over and give more space between there, that seems as though roadway space is very valuable to build, and now you're asking, spend more money on it. But I'm not the money expert on cost of that trade-off that you're proposing either.
Well, I think more of what I'm thinking about is if it's, I don't know, how wide is a bike? If, say, are they 3 feet, 6
No, it's
feet?
6 to 8 feet now.
Okay. So now you got traffic lane, a striped bike lane, a parking strip, and then a sidewalk. So instead, you would have a traffic lane, and then the parking strip, and then a sidewalk and a bike lane.
But the bike lane and the walkers still together.
So you have bicyclists and pedestrians sharing the same chunk of pavement, which is wider than a normal sidewalk.
Seems a whole lot safer.
Than a car and a bike.
Yeah, or a car and a walker.
That's.
I'll offer a counterpoint to that from an emergency response perspective, because Portland's implemented any number of these things. Every time you add an obstruction, a median, or you do that, or anytime you narrow the available travel width of the road, you increase emergency response time because there's nowhere for cars to pull over. So right now, if there's a bike lane that's unoccupied 99.9% of the time, which they are, there's room for cars to pull over.
Okay.
If there's cars parked along there, there's nowhere for people to go.
Good point.
Commissioner Mitchell, just real quickly, is this related to Beaver Creek Road or the north-south?
Not Beaver Creek Road.
The north-south main roads or local streets? Because local streets don't have dedicated bike lanes. This would just be the collector, really.
Right. I guess more the collector streets.
Okay.
But you already have that called out in the main north-south street, right? Isn't there a 30-foot?
Well, that's just for the area that's connecting the parks. So there's much more of that north-south collector road that's really Holly Lane Extension, which should have a new name, which won't be part of the linear park, which would be built to whatever standard a collector road, whatever standard we identified as what we get built.
Okay.
I think
I'll admit, the idea is not firm in my head. The idea is just to make, I know that just a plain striped bike lane is not perceived as safe to most bicyclists. And I'd like to see this area be more friendly to bicyclists and pedestrians. And I don't know exactly how you do that, and I don't know when the right time is to write it into anything.
So who is our expert to try giving us some information on this question?
I don't know if we can, this seems to be all very wrapped up into the size of the collector and the design of Beaver Creek Road and the funding of Beaver Creek Road and how to bring in kind of this questions of, optimal bike design, optimal pedestrian design. I'm wondering if this is something that can be built into the Planning Commission recommendation as a policy kind of statement, and then we bring the Planning Commission in as we get down to those details, or as bring the Planning Commission in as more direction is given on kind of the funding comments and this question about collector, if both north-south would really truly be a collector, because if they aren't, then they may go to a local standard, which then of course gets rid of the dedicated bike lane. So,
I'm not talking about Beaver Creek Road.
no, I'm thinking of the
I'm talking
East
about
Ridge Parkway.
Inside.
Yeah, it's really the East Ridge Parkway and the Holly Lane extension are kind of, and then there's kind of a southern one. So if any of those change to a local street, they wouldn't have a dedicated bike lane.
Right.
If they stay a collector, I guess the question is let me know if this is the right question. What I'm hearing is the adopted citywide collector standard for bikes meeting the intent of the concept plan to be, a bike-friendly area? And if not, should that design be revisited for collectors in this concept plan area? Okay.
So who gives you that
That's
answer?
the question.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to have that answer may not be an easy one and may not be, given very quickly to the Planning Commission. And it sounds like Laura Turway has a comment.
This is tied a little bit to the question about that roadway and if it should be not a collector or not. And so we can go back and think about it. Certainly, the design of that roadway, if we're going to change some of our street sections, we want to bring in TAC, or Transportation Advisory Committee. Let us ponder if there's ways to provide some flexibility. Obviously, we believe that the sections that are in the TSP are safe for bikes, but if we want to do something different, do we want to do something different for safe, because we want to be safer for bikes, or we want to do aesthetically something different for bikes?
Maybe to encourage bike riding?
Okay. Let's, can we noodle on this and get back to you?
Well, I guess the first question is, like I said, should I just get off my soapbox?
Well, no,
I don't think so
I'd like
necessarily.
to talk about what types of roads you're talking about, because in a neighborhood, that's a different scenario than like Myers Road, where people they're supposed to be doing 35, but they're doing 45. And you've got that line, and you've got people with kids riding, in a line like a mother and ducks, next to that. I think it's insane. And when people are doing it, I know it's the right, but I think it's a horrible idea. And in that case, there's nobody parking on the side of the road, because that kind of road doesn't have parking.
Right.
That'd be a perfect place to have a curb with some trees, and then put the pedestrians and the bikes on the other side. But in the neighborhood, yeah, you got cars, and then you've got a bike lane on the other side of that, and you're trying to, that'd be a mess. But I think on the heavier traffic roads like Beaver Creek, bicycles should not be on the side of the traffic lane. That's a horrible place for it. It should be separated, like in Europe, where they got some nice green space and they got them over there. I understand it takes a bunch of land acquisition, but that's the only safe way to ride a bike next to a 45-mile-an-hour road. So I think it's going to depend on exactly what kind of road we're talking about. It doesn't work everywhere.
So does part of our dilemma, part of your question to the commission members lie in, we need education on that topic? And who can give us the pros and cons, or the best practices, or make us a little more knowledgeable?
I guess tonight's question is, do we think what we have now is good enough and staff shouldn't spend any time on what Laura said to try to come up with input from other sources? Or if what we got looked good, here we go.
And also I'd frame that we have a street section that was in the concept plan that was adopted. So it's a question if you want to broaden the scope of this project to reassess that street design for the collector to see if it should be changed in some sense.
Okay.
I'd be okay with that.
With
Adding, considering the separated bike lane, unless they don't want to reopen it.
We can see what kind of information that we can give you. We don't have a budget to get a transportation engineer to give us more like memos and stuff like that. But I think it's a policy question if you want to keep the section that was adopted in the concept plan or change that section. That alone is a little bit of a policy question. If you want to change it, we'll do the best to get you any information that we can about different ways to do the bike lane.
Okay.
Would the traffic
That's all right.
advisory committee be of any use?
Yeah, I think that's
in that?
fine. I
Are they involved
There's
in that?
know
I've heard
more
received-
about.
Well, one thing is that we were hoping to end this project at some point. And yes, we can go to every committee.
Open that up and we're
We
talking
didn't
about it.
tell the public that we were gonna necessarily deal with the different design of the collectors.
Right.
So
I remember talking about
I would
this
wanna make
before.
sure that we get that out to the public if we add that into the scope of this also.
So we're okay with getting more information?
If it's not too much trouble, I think it'd
think
be
so.
good information.
But let's not say we have to have it and there's no way we're gonna move forward without it. But get the information, the education around it and see, does it make sense?
All right, so we're hoping to come back to you the next meeting, not the next meeting, but the meeting after that in February. We'll see if we can get on tax radar before then, and we'll see internally what we can do. But just know that there will be some limitations because of time and funding, if that's okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
understood. Okay, anything else from any of the commissioners? And we're leaving the public record open? Okay, so then we'll move on to item number 4, communications.
All right, so next meeting will be January 27th. We're gonna talk about what meetings we want to have in 2020, which we've already talked about a little bit, but primarily we're gonna talk about legal training. And so Carrie will be giving us as much information as we can get you to sit here and listen to regarding our regulations. If you have any specific questions about any particular topic, email me and I'll pass it along to Carrie. I know we've had questions on annexations and a couple other things so far. But we're here to serve, so please let us know if there's any way that we can help support you. And then also, speaking of, there is a training that's happening from DLCV staff and a local attorney. It's going to be on January 29th from 5 to 7:30 p.m. The city will pay for you to attend. There's a dinner also, if you're interested in doing that. I emailed you guys all about it. So far, we have a couple people going, so there's
That's in
that.
Salem, is that right?
It's in Salem, yeah. It's at 5 to 7:30 on January 29th. You will be, 2 days before that, we'll do our internal legal training. You're gonna probably see some overlap there because they're both about the same length of time and for the same purpose. And then also, speaking of planning commission, 6, it will soon become 7. The mayor is set to add the 7th commissioner on Wednesday, which will be Christopher Staggs, or Chris Staggs, who you interviewed. He's the gentleman who is an architect. He did the cottage homes in Kenema. So we look forward to our 7th member.
Is there the 3-member restriction on that training?
No,
No, okay.
I will pay for whoever is
I
willing to
meant the
go.
public meeting
Oh,
record keep,
no, if it's an official meeting that we would need to advertise and notice,
Yeah.
is that what you mean? If it's a
Yeah.
quorum?
it's like with the.
You're not talking about city business.
Oh, perfect, okay. All right.
Okay,
Keep your
Like,
examples to a
it's-
minimum.
Keep your examples to yourself.
Sure.
Keep your,
So yeah, next meeting should be pretty fun. No actual business. We just get to chat and you'll get to know your new member as well.
nice. Great. Okay. Anything else? Any commissioners? Anybody? Okay. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
That's good. Thanks for your direction.